Thames Water says pollution incidents have increased in the last year. It's faced a torrent of anger for dumping untreated sewage into waterways.
Thames Water says it could run out of cash.
Years of sewage spills, record levels of E. coli.
Sewage overflows.
Thames Water is fined a record £104 million.
For pumping sewage into rivers, it turned the water black.
Thames Water.
Thames Water.
Problems of Thames Water.
In recent times, privatised water companies have been caught dumping millions of tonnes of sewage into our rivers and coastlines. Yet still, operators are stalling on repairs, letting pipes burst and paying the fines while our bills go up and shareholders rake in billions. In Croydon, where I'm from, our monopoly water supplier Thames Water recently had to be given a £3 billion government-backed bailout because it's £19 billion in debt. I mean, I'm no accountant, but this Wikipedia balance sheet doesn't look very promising.
Locally, this emerged in a burst water main that left a busy high street disrupted for several weeks. Thames Water filing for an extension to continue dumping sewage into the River Wandle behind me and increase water bills for Croydon's residents. So, what's going on here? Why are my bills so high while my service is getting here? Who thought it was a good idea to remortgage all of our public utilities to the hill and give all the profits to private shareholders? It's a story that involves thousands of dead fish, 3.6 million hours of sewage dumping, and £85 billion siphoned off to shareholders over 30 years. Join us, Watch, as we ask what is going on with Thames Water.
Started from the bottom, now we're here. Started from the...
Once, people did things because they were important and not just to make a bag, as evidenced by this water tower here, which first opened in 1867. Croydon, it turns out, was quite a pioneer in building public water supply works for its people. This grand building supplied water to Croydon's then huge population of 30,000 people, which, coincidentally, is now about the same as the amount you might find in our town's Selhurst Park Stadium on a busy match day. The water tower was an essential investment alongside this place, which I always for some reason thought was a church that was also important in the history of Croydon's water supply. Surrey Street Pumping Station opened in 1851. That turned Croydon into one of the first major towns in the country to have a unified public water and sewage system. According to Wikipedia, prior to the station's opening, the inhabitants of Croydon used the River Wandle, streams and shallow wells for drinking water, which were often contaminated by seepage from privies and cesspools. If Thames Water has anything to do with it, we'll be back there in no time. This is, of course, a joke, but public water safety is something that we tend to take for granted in modern society. It was only 88 years ago that Croydon had a cholera outbreak. Some historians speculate that the wider public negative perceptions of Croydon may actually lead back to that cholera outbreak when news of the 340 disease-ridden citizens spread around London. So, how did private company Thames Water come to be our monopoly water supplier in Croydon? Well, as with a lot of problems in the modern world, the stinking foundations of this situation can be traced back to the iconic 1980s duo of neoliberalism, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. The reason behind the privatisation was purely ideological. Business would do better than the state, was the idea.
Privatised water is a better deal than nationalised water. That the water privatisation, I believe, will go very successfully indeed. That will go very successfully indeed. And perhaps, therefore, we had better wait and see so that we can pontificate in the light of the facts.
In what became a textbook neoliberal play, Thatcher severely restricted local and regional water authorities from borrowing money to complete infrastructure projects. This led to their poor service and eventually allowed the Conservatives to say, look, how badly this show is being run by us. Let's privatise it. That'll fix it. Despite shelving the plans in 1986, Thatcher's 1987 landslide election victory gave her the mandate that she needed to push through privatisation of Britain's public services. Interestingly, when Thatcher made the decision to privatise state water in 1987, there was only one other country in the world that had followed a similar path, namely Chile, which was at the time under the control of the violent military junta of General Pinochet, who may or may not have been backed by the CIA. One of the first things Pinochet did when coming to power was privatise everything. This policy was supposedly inspired by American free market economist and Satan in disguise himself, Milton Friedman, and his Chicago boys. Undeterred by sharing political positions with a South American dictator who had a hard-on for throwing people out of helicopters, or indeed the opinions of the people in her own country, Thatcher went and privatised state water in 1989. In 1991, the newly formed Thames Water closed this historic building, and it has sat unused like this ever since. Now, after all that talk about water, I really need a... So, if we're going to get to the bottom of the murky story of Thames Water from around the time I was born to the present day, we're going to need to go on location. That's why we're heading out to Thames Water's headquarters in Reading with a little symbolic message in a bottle that I feel sums up exactly how they've been treating our money. You could say that they/we are both literally and metaphorically taking the... This is Thames Water's headquarters. If you're as old as me, you might remember it from the 2006 furore when it was caught using thousands of litres of water to pressure wash the offices during a drought when many people were being fined for using their garden hoses. The company moved to this office building in 2001, costing it 20 million to build. That was shortly after it was acquired by German utilities operator RWE. Now, I don't know about you, but if we are to have private ownership of our public utilities forced upon us by the invisible hand of the market, then a German utilities company sounds like a slightly reasonable choice. However, what came next was this. Now, I'm getting paid to write this, a little bit at least, and I felt like scratching my eyes out trying to find out who was actually behind ownership of this company. So, what chance does your average Croydon resident have of knowing who owns our water utilities? The key information here, as far as I can tell, is that between 2006 and 2017, Thames Water was owned by an Australian multinational investment banking firm called Macquarie. Definitely the best people to run London's water supply, right? Macquarie took out huge loans for the company, ostensibly for infrastructure projects, and often counterweighted against their tax bill. But most of the money went on shareholder dividends. This BBC report said that by 2017, Macquarie had put Thames Water into £2 billion of debt, and all the while, shareholders were raking in 18 to 19% per year on their investment, which is around double what you'd expect to get from the stock market in that time. Between 2006 and 2017, Thames Water's debts went from £4.5 billion to £10.5 billion, but shareholder dividends were around £2.8 billion in that time, and that's just the ones we know about. In 2017, Macquarie sold Thames Water to OMERS, a Canadian pension fund, and the Kuwaiti Investment Authority. As of this year, this is the full list of Thames Water shareholders. OMERS, 32%. The University Superannuation Scheme, USS, 20%. Infinity Investments, a subsidiary of the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, 10%. British Columbia Investment Corporation, 9%. Hermes Investment Management, manager of the BT Pension Scheme, 9%. The China Investment Corporation, 9%. Queenland Investment Corporation, 9%. Aquila GP Inc., 5%. And Dutch pension fund, Stichting Pension Fund Jorgen Velgen, 2%. So, that's the history. Can you see where the flow of things is going in this situation? Yeah, so could a lot of people from as far back as 2006 when Macquarie took over at Thames Water. That year, the company's service started deteriorating rapidly, to the point it was getting regularly fined by government regulator and confusingly acronymed Water Service Regulation Authority, or Ofwat. Thames Water was both the most fined and the heaviest polluting water company in the whole of the UK between 2016 and 2017. That included it getting a then record £20 million fine shortly before Macquarie sold up. But that was just the tip of the fatberg. A decade later, all those depreciating assets, bad debts and shit dumping have finally caught up with Thames Water's services. And all the while, Macquarie executives got away with billions.
Although shareholder dividends have gone down dramatically since Macquarie sold up, Thames Water CEO Chris Weston is still making several £1 million a year plus bonuses, as are half a dozen other top execs. And as for Macquarie, in 2022 it was given the green light by the government to buy up the UK Green Investment Bank. The government concluded that the purchase would allow Macquarie to do what it does best. Quite.
So, this represents 2 decades of Croydon's public water bills. If you're from the Cronks like me, or one of the other 15 million or so Thames Water customers in England, this might be your money being pissed away into the offshore account of some Australian multinational investment bank or a Hong Kong banking corporation. Oh, and by the way, that wasn't piss, because we're not Thames Water. Despite being in known financial distress since at least 2020, in late 2023, Thames Water paid a £37.5 million dividend to its own parent company, Kemble Water Holdings. The government was apparently aware that Thames Water chairman Adrian Montague may have had some conflict of interest, as he was also chairman of Kemble Water. But he let the payment go ahead anyway. Eventually, Ofwat chalked up another £17 million fine for that violation. I think I've lost count. What is that now? 100 million? 200 million? 400 million? I'm sure Thames Water doesn't even know at this point. That's because things are not only breaking down with its pipes, but its internal computer systems are also a bit leaky too. Insiders on the staff told The Guardian this year that some of Thames Water systems are still running off a system called Lotus Notes from the 1980s, from before it was privatised. 35 years of privatisation and they still haven't upgraded important critical infrastructure. GG. That might have something to do with the company's massive £19 billion debt pile and all the huge amount of fees that it's paying for lawyers over various expensive court cases. In fact, when it asked for the £3 billion loan earlier this year, the company's creditors couldn't even agree on what form that should take. Some of their creditors said that the loan was too costly and could end up in them not being paid at all. A soulless crowd of hungry-eyed vultures in suits descended on London's High Court for the hearing, where Thames Water was eventually granted the go-ahead to ask for the £3 billion loan. One Liberal Democrat MP, Charlie Maynard, asked to intervene on behalf of Thames Water's customers and demand special measures.
Allowing Thames Water to take on £3 billion more debt is not in the interests of their millions of customers. They will all be paying the price for this futile, expensive and extremely short-term bailout. This restructuring is simply throwing good money after bad. The money from our bills, which is being spent on interest repayments, is desperately needed to repair water infrastructure, improve customer service and clean up our rivers.
Maynard said that the deal that Thames Water wanted and was granted could see as much as half of that £3 billion loan set aside for lawyers and court fees. In fact, in the end, £440 million of it was pre-set aside for fees. Add in executive salaries and expensive lawyers' fees for all those court cases, and you're looking at possibly less than half of Thames Water's customers' bills being actually used on delivering the service. However, even the government's potential special measures bill does not go far enough. Another politician who is interested in this story is House of Lords member Prem Sikka, who has basically made nationalising water his thing. Avoiding the obvious aquatic metaphors, told Parliament,
"This bill has more holes than Swiss cheese. How much sewage and how often does it have to be dumped to trigger an event for prosecution? Ofwat systematically favours companies over customers. This bill does absolutely nothing to check collusion and cognitive capture of the entire regulatory apparatus."
So, that's the big picture. But what does this all mean on a local level? Well, back in the Cronks,
Good.
That's right. You know Cronks News?
Yeah.
Cronks Watch, yeah, that's
Cronks Watch.
Oh, that's really good. Nice to meet you. Cheers.
Thames Water's failings are not exactly difficult to see almost anywhere you go that is served by them. A
cursory Google search revealed that in Croydon alone over the past few months there have been dozens of instances of burst pipes, some of which have left roads closed for weeks at a time, affecting thousands of residents and businesses. Croydon North MP and Environment Secretary Steve Reed has had double trouble from Thames Water as it continues to dump sewage into the River Wandle behind me. Thames Water says it can't afford to make the upgrades it needs to protect this priceless, beautiful river, but as we have shown, it actually did have that money, it just pissed most of it away to offshore shareholders. When I said priceless, I wasn't being hyperbolic either. Despite being a river in Croydon, which most people might associate more with broken shopping trolleys and worse, the River Wandle is actually a chalk stream. Yeah, me neither. It turns out that there are only 200 of these bad boys in the world, which makes them rarer than someone who has £1 billion. Take that, Elon. Anyway, chalk streams, due to geology and sediment, are exceptionally rare aquatic Yeah, Thames Water has been dumping shit into one of the rarest and most pristine aquatic habitats in the world. One that was exceptionally clean, and one that I didn't know was in Croydon, which somehow makes me even more angry.
In 2023, Thames Water told Sutton Council that it wouldn't be ready to upgrade the sewage works near the River Wandle until 2037. After a diesel spill in March this year poisoned hundreds of fish and other wildlife in the river, Thames Water generously stepped in to save the day. They said they might start planning on improvements to the River Wandle's infrastructure in 2027, but it admitted it had done no work on this over the past 5 years.
We're aware of problems caused by misconnections on the Wandle, which are mostly wrongly connected pipes on private properties. We regard all discharges as unacceptable, and we have published plans to upgrade over 250 of our sewage treatment works and sewers.
Not one of those 250 upgrade sites is planned for anywhere near the River Wandle, by the way. Meanwhile, our water bills are set to go up by 35% in the next few years. Thames Water wanted to raise them by 54%, but Ofwat told them to cap it at 35%. But they did it anyway. Sort of. Some Thames Water customers were being given what's called a front-loaded bill structure, whereby they pay more now and then prices will hopefully go down by the end of the 5-year period to hit the 35% cap. Prices going down? I'll believe that one when I see it. Someone's getting front-loaded here, and it's definitely not Thames Water shareholders. So, Thames Water shareholders are probably off sunning themselves on a yacht off the coast of Monaco somewhere, while thousands of Croydon and South London residents are overlooking rivers full of dead fish and sewage while paying more for the privilege. Sounds about right. So, where does this course of events take us from here? Well, two things from the last year may shed some light through the murk. One, the Patchwork Consortium that owns Thames Water is looking to sell, and two, we elected a Labour government. In October 2024, Steve Reed told the media that his Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs was planning on banning water companies from making a profit. Instead, he argued that all profits should be invested back into the business. Begging the question, which private company would want all that risk without the reward? Well, the idea is senior executives can still get paid high salaries without shareholder capitalism being involved. There is precedent for this model. It is employed by Welsh Water, who aren't in billions of pounds of debt, and you probably barely ever hear about, which, for a water company, is a good thing. However, Reed ruled out the obvious step of just nationalising Thames Water completely, which he said would cost £10 billion. Meanwhile, back in the world of high finance, Thames Water has picked an American private equity giant as its preferred buyer. 6 companies had expressed interest, but Thames picked New York-based investment giant Kohlberg Kravis Roberts as its preferred partner. They haven't disclosed any details on the deal just yet, but it is expected to be in the region of £4.5 billion. Thames Water shareholders will be getting a hefty chunk of liquid cash from the deal, that's for certain.
During the purchase negotiations, Thames Water actually had the stones to ask Ofwat if it could be let off some of its £400 million debt pile. It said its terrible financial situation was putting off investors. Thames said, without some leeway on the debts that it owes for its fines for breaking regulations over the years, investors could only expect to make 1 to 2% on the deal per year, thus there weren't many interested. 2% of 4.5 billion is £90 million. £90 million a year. Clearly not enough to afford a pot to piss in, is it? Will somebody please think of the shareholders? It isn't clear if Thames Water was given these concessions by Ofwat and negotiations are ongoing. So that, friends, is what is going on with Thames Water. All the while, our pipes are bursting, our rivers are getting filled with shit, and a few people are raking in billions. Will it change anytime soon? I doubt it. Without a government willing to dig a new trench in the murky world of international finance, the money will keep flowing away from our pockets while our service gets worse. Cheers! It was recently the 1-year anniversary of our first upload on this channel, and we've been really humbled by the interest and encouragement that we've had since then. I know we haven't been extremely consistent, but there's a lot more to come from us. Plus, thanks to all our patrons listed here, who remind us exactly why we do this, and that people really do want this kind of content. And as always, keep watching the Kronks.